Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to MusicWise. My name is Donato Cabrera, and this week we have one of my favorite pianists, musicians to work with. Been so fortunate. We haven't worked nearly as much as we would like. I'm sure we'll be able to change that into the future, but the pianist Charlie Albright, whenever we've worked together, he always brings such a wonderful sunny disposition and incredible engagement with the music, with the musicians, his fellow colleagues on stage, and of course with the audience. And he also brings a very special and unique way of making music that I just find infectious. So I'm really looking forward to this hour, this chat with Charlie. So let's get it started. Hey Charlie. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good, doing great. How about you?
Hanging in there. I think that's the common thread we're all sort of saying to one another these days. Hanging in there, making the best of it.
Join the club, right?
I truly mean that when, as I introduced you, you bring really an infectious enthusiasm and a positivity to your music making. And an engagement that is very special and something that's very memorable, and the times we've worked together I really cherish. Tell me something about. I've always been curious to talk a little bit more about your background. Of course, we've done your standard pre-concert chats in the past,
sure,
before the concerts, and we've touched upon this, but. Where did your fascination for making music, where did that come from, do you think? I know you've played piano since from a very young age, but can you remember back to those initial feelings of before the piano, before music? Or has it really just always been there?
It's I can't really remember a time where I haven't played the piano. I started when I was, I think, 3.5. And so I create memories in my head, and I'm not sure if they're real memories or you've been told the story so much that your mind just kind of creates pictures to go with it,
right?
Or what? The story goes that we had a really old, clunky, junky garage sale upright piano in our house, and I guess I climbed up and started pecking out "Twinkle Little Star" when I was 3, and so my mom came in and asked who taught me that, and I said no one did. So she taught me the little that she knew, and then I started taking lessons from this little lady who played the accordion a block away. And over the next several years, it was just me learning from several teachers, some officially, and then some who are just teachers, kind of like mentors in a way. One lady who was really formative Joanne owned a piano and organ store in this little mall complex in my town that I grew up in Centralia, Washington. And we'd go in there often. My parents would take me, and she'd teach me songs by ear, and then I'd improvise to them, and then she'd play the piano, I'd play the organ, and then we'd switch in the middle. So it was always this sense of fun. And I think that's one of the things that really kind of kept me to it, because it wasn't so much work, it wasn't so much practicing, it was just having fun. And
I think that's a really key. You've probably recognized the fact that this is not a common story, or at least maybe it might be somewhat of a common story for a lot of people when they begin, but then perhaps there are outside pressures or conservatory life or a negative experience with a teacher. Some of these things sort of creep into one's experience with music learning or experience music as one, or you go through a rocky period in your adolescence that has nothing to do with music, but somehow, there are a lot of factors that can become sort of connected with learning music at a young age that may not be so positive. So I would imagine you acknowledge the fact that you've been able to keep this positive engagement is a wonderful, wonderful gift.
Absolutely. I think that it has to stay fun at least a little bit. I mean, there's always times where you're not going to want to play. You're just like, there's days you don't want to go to work or whatever, but I think it's important to keep that sense of fun, because, you know, in the end, that's a big part of what music is that communication and sense of portraying emotion and just having a good time.
I wanted to start off and with one of the last things you sent me as one of the things to play, which is this new release. When was it actually released, by the way?
Like a month or two ago. So it's a released during coronavirus time album.
We'll talk about the moment we're in a minute, but it is of a composer who is very near and dear to my heart. Perhaps because of this project, he is now near and dear to your heart. But this is the second volume of the music of the piano music of Franz Schubert, and on this disc there's an improvisation that you perform, as well as the 6 moments musicaux and the A major sonata, the second to last sonata that he composed in A major. And I thought we'd listen to the scherzo, talk about being playful. This is one of the most playful movements of Schubert's music, of any music. So let's take a listen.
Sounds good.
Tell us a little bit about this recording project. By the way, that's it. What a wonderful job with this scherzo movement. It's as you are well aware in the way you play it, there's such a lovely lilt in the way Austrians have in their scherzo waltz type, Ländler type movements. And you capture that so perfectly. Tell us a little bit about this Schubert project, how it came to be, and what your experience is like with Schubert and how you feel about his music.
Sure. Well, so these three albums were recorded live, so there was no like splicing or anything like that. So what you heard here is basically what was there in the concerts. I was giving a series of 3 concerts at the Gardner Museum in Boston. The music director there, Scott Nikrens at the time, thought it'd be nice. He recommended that I do this project of giving 3 full Schubert concerts.
Why do you think he recommended that to you?
He probably thought it would be good for me, in the sense that it's Schubert is one of those composers that I don't think I had played. I'm trying to remember if I'd played any of his pieces prior to those concerts. I might have played one or two of the impromptus at some point a long time ago, but I never really seriously delved into any of his music. And so the project was very scary, especially because over the course of the three concerts I played the final 3 sonatas, which are some of his biggest and hardest, if you will. And then I did.
They're major compositions
compositions.
I mean, they're very long sonatas. I mean, some of the longest sonatas ever written.
Yeah, I think at least one of them is like 40 minutes long. They're very long pieces of music. And then also both sets of his 4 impromptus, Opus 90 and then 142 or 143 or whatever it is, and then his 6 Moment Musical. And Schubert is one of the. I always used to joke that Schubert is. It's a joke, but at the same time, it's not, because I think it's true. It's one of those composers that his music is technically not necessarily very difficult. Like, when you compare him to, some of the crazy technical pieces out there, it's a lot of it's very simple, simple chords, simple harmonies. But he writes with such a depth that to be able to play it correctly and with the right maturity, you really have to be like 95 years old and have like all of that life experience built up. I think because it's one of those things that it just is so much beneath the notes, between the notes, and that it's not just surface level. And so that's one of the most hard parts of playing a lot of his pieces.
I absolutely agree, and it is, and yet at the same time, you're absolutely right. I often compare, especially his late sonatas, with the symphonies of Bruckner. It's the same idea. The music isn't necessarily technically challenging, but there's so much depth underneath the notes that must be conveyed to the colleagues on stage, to the rest of the orchestra, and that the orchestra must be able to then transmit to the audience. Bruckner's music is profound in that way, like Schubert's. So this is the second series. So there'll be 3 discs of the third.
There'll be 3. There's still one. They've all been, the concerts are all done, but they're just kind of coming out one at a time.
And you mentioned this at the beginning. What is it like releasing a disc during this releasing a recording during this time? On the one hand, I could imagine that you sort of have people's attention. Everyone's sort of online these days, but tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's very different. I mean, there's no, a lot of more and more everything is going online, becoming digital. You were joking about, discs and stuff, but the previous couple commercial recordings I do have discs of. This one, at least as of now, there's no plans to come out with a physical CD. I mean, even cars are doing away with a lot of those. But at the same time, after concerts and stuff, it's having that physical something in your hand. There is something to be said about that. It's you can sign it and you meet with the people, and it's a great chance to really connect with audiences. After the shows are done. When that'll return, who knows? But but it's different releasing it during a global pandemic.
There's a first time for everything.
There's a first time for everything, I guess. But it's a unique experience. There's no launch party or anything. Not necessarily that all CDs have that, but I'm not going to be selling these after concerts for a while. So it's definitely different.
I wanted to play another. Of course, what we started with is certainly an aspect of Schubert's music. This playfulness, but of course, what most folks think of first when they think of Schubert are his endless supply of the most beautiful melodies ever written, and the first movement of the Moments musicaux has this, and also this profundity, that this simple profundity, which is on the page seemingly doable, but then in performance and in practice is a lifelong pursuit. So let's listen to the first movement.
Sounds good.
I was, as I frequently do when I listen to these type of movements from Schubert, I find myself thinking of just dreaming a little bit and contemplating. And I just was reading the other day, or watching rather, this presentation on lucid dreaming and the idea of keeping a dream journal and working subconsciously through whatever issues you may want to work through dreaming. And I've come to the conclusion just now, it might change, that Schubert's music is sort of like lucid dreaming.
That's an interesting way of thinking of it. That's a neat way of putting it. I think Schubert, a lot of his music, and his last sonatas, this particular piece that we just listened to, it's I don't think it should be listened to necessarily the same way other music should. Certain music you listen to and there's a very clear direction. There's a very clear start, middle, end, a very clear climax, and a lot of Schubert's music, not all of it, but a lot of it has this very kind of fantasy world. Like it shouldn't be necessarily listened to with the intention of getting somewhere, but as its own experience. It's almost meant to be listened to and for you to dream, as you're listening to it. It has a very unique quality, I think.
So many people will say, and I don't mean it to be like this, that, oh, I love to go to concerts because I can just sit back and relax and let let my day's troubles be washed away by them. I don't mean that. And I don't think you mean that either, because the music that we play, the music that we listen to, we want to engage with this music. And I think what we're both saying is that Schubert's music is this dream world, this fantasy. And yes, there might be a overlying structure that he adheres to, but that's not his goal. Like Beethoven's goal. Beethoven has he has this structure that he is constantly working with and against. Schubert doesn't have the same box that he chooses to ignore like Beethoven's, but he does have this sense of emotional connectedness that is somewhere in the gray areas of our lives.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, that's a great way of putting it. Absolutely.
On this fantastic recording, it begins with an improvisation, and you mentioned that a little bit in growing up, that having fun with music is a key element of who you are as a musician, as a person. But improvisation is not necessarily something that a classical pianist learns, or they may have done it at one point, but it's not something they employ on a frequent basis at concerts. Can you tell us a little bit about this? Because this is something that is very much a part of what you do on stage and who you are as a musician.
Sure. So, as I was saying earlier, I played by ear until I was probably 7 or 8. And then I met my first classical teacher, Nancy Adsit. And I was taking from a jazz teacher who recommended to my parents that I take a year's worth of classical music to develop technique. And then the idea was that I would go back to the fun songs. And I ended up kind of sticking with classical music, or keep going down that road. But I always kept playing those fun songs on the side, and a lot of that included making up my own stuff, whether it's playing something that I heard, like a Disney song or Great Balls of Fire or something like that, and making my own version of it, or making something up entirely on my own. And this kind of improvisation actually wasn't uncommon back when a lot of this classical music that we're playing was written, And instead, there's there's been kind of a movement in the past, recent classical music, in the past like 150 years or something, where people basically stopped improvising. So in Cadenzas is the often used example. So when you're playing a concerto with an orchestra, you have the solo parts, everything is written out. But in the olden times, there would be a gaping hole where Mozart would be like, Now the pianist does whatever he or she wants, and then the orchestra will join in when everything is done, and then they'll just keep on going. And the idea was that you were to improvise. And then over time, they started writing in cadenzas, that is. And so pianists would start like learning, the cadenzas that were written down, and those became the kind of staples. And over time, people basically have stopped improvising. There's a few people who do, but by and large, almost no one does. And so I always loved doing it. So, many seasons ago, I started incorporating improvisations in my concert touring. So maybe in the first half, I'd have a 10-minute long piece or something where I would just make it up and see whatever comes out. And a couple mentors of mine, they said, Charlie, instead of doing that, you should ask random audience members for notes, and then use those random notes as the basis of a random melody, and then use that random melody to make a improvised piece of music. And they said that way people won't think you're cheating and playing something that you already practiced and are just kind of saying, oh, this is an improvisation, when it's not. So I started doing that, and that was fun. And over time, I started doing more and more with it. So oftentimes in concertos, I'll improvise a cadenza. And I've even done concerts where I've improvised the entire concert, where I'll make up a 30-minute long sonata, or I'll make up whatever. And it's been tremendous fun. And it's a lot of fun.
I have a couple of remarks. So you now, if you're playing a traditional concerto, say by Mozart or Beethoven especially, and by the way, those two composers, that's how they made their mark initially upon coming onto the professional scene in Vienna, was through these playoffs, as it were, between famous pianists who could improvise on the spot, and the person that
dueling pianos or something.
dueling pianos. And Mozart was the king of the hill for years, and then Beethoven came along, and he at the age of 22, he arrives in Vienna, and the first thing he does is starts accepting challenges by other pianists, and would win those dueling piano moments. And I would imagine that. So my question to you: do you, in the spirit of Beethoven and Mozart, when you perform those concertos, do you make up your cadenzas now entirely on the spot, or are they based somewhat on the cadenzas that have been written, put into print by these composers? What's your process for those two composers specifically?
Sure. So if the question was about in concertos in general, I would say it depends on the composer. For composers like Beethoven specifically, I try to. There's kind of a tight wire for me there, and the thought process is this: I want the cadenza to still make sense. You just played oftentimes 12-minute long first movement or something, and there are themes in it, and Beethoven has very clear themes that he repeats over and over and over again. Oftentimes there's 2 or 3 different ones. And then you have this piece. And then you have 2 or 3, you have another 2 movements that come after it. So I want it to make sense in the context of the piece as a whole. If I were to suddenly break out in some rock and roll style for a cadenza, the whole thing would fall apart. It wouldn't make any sense. So I want to keep it kind of in the style of Beethoven, using a lot of the themes that he uses. Not only necessarily from the first movement that I just played, which is where the cadenzas usually are, but maybe I can bring in some from what's to come in the future. But I want it to still be cohesive. I guess that's a big goal. And so, often the pre-existing cadenzas, like the Beethoven Third that you and I did together. There's the very famous cadenza that's written out, and I had originally learned that cadenza when I first learned the piece. I think a while before then. So I knew the official one, the one that everyone plays. And that one very cleverly uses the 2 or 3 main themes from the first movement. So I thought, well, I want to include this theme, and this theme, just like that cadenza does, because they were from the whole 12 minutes prior. But I want to do something different with them, and I want to use them in my own way. So I try to keep it somewhat in the classical style, but still, schmaltzing it a little bit because I like that, just because why not? And so I want to put my own stamp on it as well. So, the guides in terms of the themes to use. It's, if you know the cadenza that's written, it can be helpful, but it's not always necessary. Last year, I played a piece by Vivian Fine, and I didn't learn the cadenza. I learned the rest of the piece, didn't learn the cadenza, and then at the concert, I improvised it. But I don't know I think I heard recordings of the cadenza, but I never actually learned the notes to it, the one that she wrote down. I just made up my own for that one.
That's
what kind of depends.
Now, of course, there are a couple of ways to bring everyone back in at the end of the cadenza. Okay, so as the beads of sweat are starting to form on the conductor's forehead, like when is this going to end? Of course, what you do beforehand is say, okay, Donato, wait for this trill. I'll give you a nod, and then we'll go on. That's always a wonderful moment for conductors, as you know.
Well, I mean, you can tell me from your perspective when we did we played the Rhapsody in Blue together too before that, and there was not really a cadenza in that one. There's lots of solos, but not so much a cadenza. But when I was doing the Beethoven and I told you I'm improvising the cadenza, I did improvise that concert, didn't I?
Yes, you did. You did.
Yeah. What were you thinking? You were probably like, crap. What? You're probably like, you're kidding me, right?
I was just hoping that, there are sometimes when there are double trills, right? When you do one trill that sort of sounds like it's going to go, but then you do another sort of octave trills or something. And I was hoping, okay, just as long, I'm going to get ready for the trill, and I'm going to be trusting in that you're going to give me the nod. Because it's really all about, and here it is.
And not psyching you out. Like, I'll do a few things that sound like that in the middle, but then keep going in another direction. Right. Be ready, Donato, and keep going.
It's a fake out. Those are wonderful moments. The second thing that always fascinates me is what you mentioned is asking for something from an audience, a note. Or sometimes you ask for a number, right? You give me 3 numbers or 8 numbers or something, or whatever.
I think just the note names.
You ask for a note name, okay, and then you play the note that each one gives you, and then you create a fantasy from those notes. And at that moment, I'm curious, is it something, okay, you decide whether it's going to be a waltz or it's going to be a march or something? Is that sort of in your mind as you're playing those notes, like, oh, this sounds to me like it's going to be a waltz. I'll start off that way and let it go. Let's see where it leads. How does your mind work?
Sure. So a lot of it depends on the time that I have. So if I'm doing 4 notes and I'm going to make a 3-movement sonata, that's very different than if I'm going to have a 10-minute long piece or something that I need to make sound good, hopefully. So often when I hear the 4 notes, I start thinking, okay, I'm not personally a big fan of like atonal music. I just not my thing. So I like my music to be tonal. I like it to have like keys and harmony and stuff. So I immediately or oftentimes think, what key will this make sense in, right? And then after that, in the back of my mind, I have this time duration that I have, whether it's 10 minutes or a half an hour or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I think, okay, I have 10 minutes and it's in C# minor or whatever. And what kind of a feeling do I want to bring out of it is kind of what I try to figure out. Like, do I want this to be tragic or do I want it to be joyous or whatever? And along with that might come, is it a waltz or is it that kind of goes hand in hand too. And then I just kind of go with the idea that I wanted to have a beginning and a middle and an end. I wanted to sound cohesive as much as possible because it's not, because you want it to sound like it was completely written out and edited 100 million times when you really don't have that luxury. Right. So I always think of improvising as basically playing with Legos. So you have you have this big box of different colored and shaped Legos, and you're not going to take a Lego and start cutting it into different pieces. You have a 2x3 or whatever. and you think, okay, I want to build a house today, or I want to build a rocket, or or whatever. And that's kind of like, what the feel is of the piece, the time. And then as you go, you're just kind of, picking out the pieces that you have and then arranging them in a way that makes it into that overarching, hopefully cohesive piece of music. That's how it goes.
So I'm getting ready for our next clip here. And I would like to actually go, if we can, Aled, if we can go to the Chopsticks Improvisation first, because since we're talking about improvisation. So now, of course, what we've been talking about is you making up a theme, or taking, and what we're about to hear is taking something that people already have written down or know, like a Beethoven cadenza, and maybe, or the first couple of themes of something. But this, of course, is an improvisation on something that, even if you never really learned piano, maybe you had an uncle that taught you how to play chopsticks, and every kid.
Liberace do a version of Chopsticks. It was so over the top, and I was like, well, that sounds like fun. Everyone knows Chopsticks. And I went to the Stella and I went to the old Steinway Hall in New York, in the basement where they used to keep all the pianos. They've since moved, and I think now that's a condo building or something. But we were down in there, and I was just like, let's set up our phones and record this. And so we did. That's what we did.
Well, let's listen to it. I think everyone will know the tune.
I hope so.
had to wait for it to get into the introspective minor moments.
The moody section.
That's just brilliant, and I think that it's such a wonderful, freeing thing to even watch a musician watch you play something sort of just out of just at the moment, and seeing seeing the little strands that take you from one musical strands that take you from one section to the next, like the descending. I could see how you had started that descending figure, and then you made that sort of, it's almost like a theme in variations,
Yeah, exactly.
One of the other things that I love is that you, aside from when you do an encore where you're asking an audience maybe to improvise on the spot, you do an encore that I've asked you. I think I asked you to play twice, but both concerts, which is one of my. And I'm sure you play it all the time. And I think without introducing it, we should. Well, actually, I have to introduce because Alan will not know what I'm introducing. But well, actually, I could. Alan, play the one that was made in Bergen, Norway.
The Norwegians like it too.
They do? Oh, good. I'm glad.
Oh, they do. Great balls of fire.
I'm waiting for you to get like throw the chair back and like stand up, like.
I've tried to do the whole lighting the piano on fire, but Steinway isn't so up to that. I don't convince them yet.
I guess they're past that. All right. Really, that's such a fun encore, and it brings it, and what it does, of course, is that it just lets everyone just be themselves.
Oh yeah. It's a lot of fun. That was one of the pieces I learned, I think, from Joanne back when I was learning from her at the piano and organ store. I think it's people like I did it at last year. I got a chance to play with the American Symphony on the main stage of Carnegie, and it was my first time there, and I was nerve-wracked. And I actually have a funny story that goes along with that. I was thinking of doing it as an encore, but I was too scared to ask if I should, because I was afraid I would know what the answer is, like, no, it's not appropriate, don't do it. So I kind of beat around the bush a bit, and I asked some of the people that worked at the orchestra, people that usually do encores after the concert, and the answer was no. Like, not only did they not play Great Balls of Fire, but I guess it wasn't a common thing on that series or something. And so I was in my dressing room, and there was this the caretaker guy who worked at the hall, not for the orchestra, but at Carnegie itself. And he was saying, I've only been here a very short time. And I was telling him my idea, and he says, just do it, Charlie. You should do it. And I said, you know what, I'll just do it. Why not? And we were going down, he was taking me down the elevator onto the stage. And it turns out he's been working there for like 30 or 40 years. And he's seen like every greatest, violinist, pianist, musician in history come through those doors. And he was just, kind of full of it that day, saying he just started there or something. But I did it. And you never saw so many screaming, 70, 80-year-old ladies out in the audience, I tell you.
There was something that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to ask you about and just remind me. You said you had a teacher that was teaching you that you were working on jazz, and that teacher suggested you take time to take a classical music piano lessons to learn about music and the foundations, et cetera, et cetera. Was your goal to be in jazz first, or if not, have you ever considered? Is that something you also do? Do you sit down and play the charts with your buddies somewhere?
I mean, I at the time I wasn't thinking I'm going to be a jazz pianist. We had somehow been introduced to this jazz pianist in Olympia, Washington, and I was just having fun. At that point, everything was just kind of fun, and I was playing everything from Backstreet Boys to Disney songs at that point, and a lot of oldie songs, like Great Balls of Fire. And so it wasn't a plan necessarily to do jazz. Nowadays, I still do for fun on my own and stuff, but I'm not super great at jazz. But I still love playing it. So I do play it for fun quite a bit. But no, there was no real plan to I'm going to become a jazz pianist or a classical pianist or anything like that. It was just music.
No, of course, I love listening to some of the great jazz pianists. They're just in talk, and I mean that's sort of the pinnacle of improvisation in today's world, right? You hear someone like Bill Evans play, these especially the live recordings, and you are so appreciate their. Especially if you're a musician, trained musician, you appreciate their knowledge of harmony and structure, and for them to create these not perfect is the wrong word, because they're not about perfection. It's about emotion, pure emotion, really. Exactly. It's a admirable skill that they have.
Absolutely.
We have another now. I don't know. Have you ever met the pianist Arkady Volodos?
I have not.
Because he's a very interesting. I haven't met him either. I get the impression that he also has, a love for improvisation. Anyone who does arrangements often can have that skill of improvisation to a certain extent. Would you agree?
I think so. A lot of it comes hand in hand, probably.
Right. And you've chosen this incredible. Of course, it was a piece that Mozart wrote for piano, and it was part of one of his piano sonatas, the Rondo alla Turca. But this is a jazzed up version by the great pianist Arkady Volodos. Is this another encore that you often perform?
This is a common encore piece. It's one of those. I think it's really neat because everyone knows the tune. They've heard it on Looney Tunes or something, and then he basically just gave it a ton of steroids and added a bunch of notes.
Let's take a listen. Great job. Bravo. Um, I'm curious, what's your process like when you're learning, say, a piece like that, which is a lot of, just incredible technique involved, versus, say, learning the first movement of the B flat major sonata by Schubert?
That's a good question. For me, a lot of it starts with just learning the notes. I'm a horrible sight reader. I'm bad at it. Some people you can sit down, Rachmaninoff concerto they'd never play, and they'll just play it like, I'm the opposite. I'm like counting ledger lines and got my pencil out writing in the names, and then, oh, that's a flat there. It's embarrassing, but that's just how it is. For me, memorization comes a little better than I think some other people, but at the same time, I'm worse than most people when it comes to like reading the notes. So once I can play it up to speed with the music, then it usually gets memorized pretty well. Mm-hmm. So for me, the first step is usually, just learning the notes and getting it to a point where I can start playing it without like counting the lines and stuff. Mm-hmm. But in like long-term learning something like that versus, that piece, I don't think depth is the word you use to describe that piece. That's a showy bravura, over the top, it's a great encore piece. It's a great piece. So that one is all about the technique pretty much, right? You play at the end of a concert or something. And with something like a Schubert, you have to really live with those pieces for a long time. I mean, the more you play it, the more years you have it, the more it changes. I think a lot of the pieces that I had for a long time change over time, and my interpretations kind of change. But I think especially in pieces like, the Schubert that has that depth, if I think if you were to play it in a year or two or another 10 or 20 years, or even, 40, 50 years later, the way you would approach it would be significantly different, be a lot different based on the experiences that you've had leading up to that point. It's almost like some of his old sonatas, like his very last one, it's almost like an old man is looking back on his entire life and reminiscing. And it's that kind of deep pensiveness, in thinking back through his successes, his failures, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. It's
question. Here's a wonderful. I think how a lot of us feel about different types of music. There's a question from one of the people watching right now. Charlie, what do you think about as you listen to you perform, as opposed to when you're performing? So as now, what goes through your mind when you're watching these clips from years past, as opposed to while you're playing?
Oh, well, I usually don't listen to myself play. Like I don't like listening to recordings of myself. It's just there's just, I don't know, maybe it's too close to home. I don't know. When I listen to myself, there's always things. It's like, why did I do it like that? Or how come I, this or that or the other thing. So I avoid listening to myself play. When I'm playing, ideally you want to be in the zone where you don't have to think about any of the notes. You don't have to think about anything your hands are physically doing or the memorization, what comes next. Ideally you want to be, able to just feel the music and try to bring that out as best as possible. Like the emotions you want to, for me, I'd rather miss half the notes and try to say something with what I'm playing, mm-hmm. and hopefully communicate that emotion or idea or whatever across to the audience, than get all the notes right and just have it be like, so what? Yeah.
What role does the audience play during your concerts in terms of when they're connecting to you or not connecting to you? Does it matter? Does it change from venue to venue? What role does the audience have in your concert?
I think it's really important. I think it's really important. It's not the same whenever you're, if you're playing by yourself, you're not going to have that energy and the connection. I view concerts as not, some guy sitting up, behind him in a glass box somewhere on the stage, and he's sending stuff out and other people are receiving. I view it as like, it's a community thing. It's a, it's a two-way street. One of the reasons why I love talking to audiences and stuff is because, I don't want it to be like I'm up there playing, they're out there listening. I think it's a communal event where we're all there on any given night or day or whatever, and we're all in the same boat. We're all there to experience something as a group, as together. And having an audience provides an energy that you don't get when you're by yourself practicing, and you don't get. I think it's it's an experience that's shared among people, and I think that's one of the magical parts of live performance.
Your interests go beyond simply concertizing. You have created a nonprofit in your hometown, correct?
Oh, it's not my own nonprofit, but it's a thing with my. When I was in high school, I went to Centralia College, which is the community college, and so it's in collaboration with the Centralia College Foundation.
I see.
So they have a foundation. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the way you've chosen to sort of give back or be involved with your background and with people who are interested in music.
Well, I mean, so I lived in my town of Centralia, Washington. We moved there when I was 1, and my parents are still in the same house that I grew up in. And my mom works at the college there in the library. And I went to that college during high school, and so I mean, the town is really, it's a huge part of my life. It was where I was raised. And so we many years ago now, back when I was in college, we started talking about, they had this brand new concert hall that they had built not too long before, but they had a pretty lousy piano. It was maybe it was good at one point, but it was in need of help. And so we thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if they could have a real, a new 9-foot Steinway or something that would, live up to this hall, and maybe it could encourage, people to come perform or whatever. And so we started, over the years, I've done concerts on occasion where we've raised money for the piano. So they ended up buying a new 9-foot Steinway, and also the scholarship to help students in the area who were interested in music and stuff to help them a little bit.
That's wonderful. Charlie, our hour's up.
It is. That's right.
Yeah, I know, because it's so fun chatting with you and talking about music and talking about the joy you bring to all of us in your music making. I can't wait for us to make music together again in person.
I can't wait too, Donato.
And thank you so much for being a guest today on Music Wise.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always good to talk and catch up, and
and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you all next week. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.